Well, it's April the 26th, and I thought for a change of pace, I would kind of get away from the hardcore politics today and get into a topic which still has a bit of politics in it, but it has a lot more of technology in it as well. And that is NASA's Artemis project and the decision to give the Moon Lander Award to SpaceX. And so this is going to be an interesting situation because, of course, SpaceX has quite a few fans in the space community, and it has a significant number of detractors as well. And obviously, I think there's a variety of reasons for that, and we could get into some of those in a while here. But the situation is that, again, basically, NASA probably made the decision partly on technical grounds and maybe overwhelmingly on financial reasons. And we can get into that in a little bit. By the way, if you like these videos, remember to subscribe and give me a like because it helps out with the algorithm, and you can ring the bell to be notified. And of course, any comments would be interesting. Okay, so here's what's going on as I see it. You have three teams that were in competition, and originally the plan was to down to select to two at this stage. And of course, the teams are the SpaceX team, the national team, which is led by Blue Origin, which is a company run by Jeff Bezos of Amazon fame and Washington Post fame, and it also had as subcontractors. It had, among others, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, two aerospace giants, and then last they had Dianetics, which is a big tech integrator company, as I understand it. I don't know as much about them, but apparently they put together a team that has a rather interesting lander as well. And the issue is that the other two alternatives to the SpaceX were substantially more expensive, and I think at least the Blue Origin team also required more money up front than SpaceX did. Because the advantage that SpaceX had going into this from a financial point of view is the fact they're already involved in developing the basic vehicle that they're going to use as part of their Mars project, if you will. And so they can simply make a version of this vehicle for the moon lander as the plan, and therefore the cost will be shared between the two initiatives, and that would mean that the company will be putting a lot more money into the project than the others would, because they have their own objectives for doing it, where the others are more, I think, looking at just as contractors trying to get government work. Okay, so if that makes any sense. So the 2.9 billion contract, I think the others were somewhere under 5 billion, 4 point something, I believe. So they're quite a bit more expensive. And the key driver in this, of course, is the fact that the Congress way underappropriated the money that NASA wanted, somewhere in around the 900 million level rather than 3.3 billion that was requested. So without enough money to proceed, they decided to go with a low budget option of SpaceX, if you will. Now, the reason why I have a few problems with this is that we're tying a near-term, realistic, supposedly, moon program to a rather exotic developmental effort that SpaceX is engaged in. Now, the fact that SpaceX has succeeded with the Falcon 9 rocket and recovering the first stages and reused them successfully, that is a major plus, that they did something that I think a lot of people might have been skeptical of up front that they'd succeed in. I mean, some of the earlier attempts, I think, recovering by parachute were failures, for instance. So, these things happen, and but they've been successful on this. But now they're kind of going a little further out, I think, with this latest thing. There's all sorts of new tech in here. Engines, using new propellants. I think that part I'm probably more comfortable with, because, I mean, although you're going to methane, liquid methane, I guess with our experience with kerosene on the one hand and liquid hydrogen on the other, methane is probably a lot lower stressing as a propellant than hydrogen would be, and it's closer to the historic, propellants like the kerosene, although of course it's a little different. It is cryogenic, but we use that in we use that sort of cryogenics in a lot of purposes. So it's not. I don't think it's nearly. I mean, the oxygen that's in all liquid oxygen is much more challenging, I think, by far, and that's commonplace in space, of course. That's not a problem anymore. We can know how to do that. So, but I think the other aspects is the concept of orbital refueling, and this giant, untested heavy lift lower stage. I mean, so far the attempts to test the Starship have largely provided a lot of good technical data, but they've also led to some pretty spectacular crashes. I mean, but when we get into the moon program, it's another issue. You're dealing with a very large, very tall program. Now, the Dianetics entry was notable because it was a very flat-looking lander, which would leave the crew easy access to and from the vehicle, similar to what the Apollo Project LEM did, right? And that was a kind of an advantage they had. Apparently, they had some serious weight problems with their design at this stage, so there's technical issues that would have to be resolved. And of course, those probably mean more costs as you resolve technical issues, right? But on the other hand, one of the advantages a flat-type lander of this sort would have is the fact that, as on some of the moon landings, for instance, Apollo 11, you're coming down, and all of a sudden you notice where you're coming down is a little too rough of terrain, and you have to move sideways and look for a landing place, right? It looks like it's going to be a little bit harder to do that with a SpaceX design, for instance. The other aspect is this orbital refueling technique. I mean, this using cryogenics on this level, this has never been done before, and this is a pretty, bold initiative to me to do it that way. I mean, I'm not against the idea as a developmental effort, but if we want to tie our realistic national pride Artemis program to something that was more like a very adventuristic project that Elon has embarked upon. And I think that is an interesting question there. Of course, I can see why the SpaceX would be all in for it, because they'll get NASA money to help them develop the vehicles they need. And also that'll mean that being part of the NASA program, government approval of various tests they want to do will probably be much easier to achieve than they might be otherwise if it was a purely private venture. So that is an aspect of this. The other thing that kind of is perplexing me is the whole thing is turning into a bit of a kind of a Rube Goldberg design. I mean, okay, we're going to use the most powerful first stage booster that the U.S. has ever launched. I'm not sure exactly how it compares with the N1. I haven't looked that up right now, but it's bigger than the Saturn V at takeoff in terms of thrust. We're going to launch that into orbit in order to orbit the Starship, which will then be somewhat depleted of fuel in orbit. Then we'll have to send up. I've heard 2 tankers for this moon mission. It's more for the Mars mission. But I presume the payload will be reduced here for the moon mission compared to that. But these other launches heavy lift launches will have to take place sequentially, and then refuel this moon lander version of Starship in orbit, which will then under robot control go into a lunar orbit, which presumably will be similar to what was planned for the Gateway, which presumably for the earliest missions won't be available yet. And then the crew will be launched in SLS and Orion to go rendezvous in that orbit, and then dock, and then transfer over to the lander, which will then go and land on the moon. Okay, if you get the idea. So we're looking at a total of at least 4 heavy lift launches to do one moon mission here. And of course, things could go wrong. And one thing that's sort of scary is the possibility that the SpaceX heavy lift vehicle would actually have a catastrophic launch failure, similar to what did happen to Russia's N1 rockets back in the late 60s and early 70s. And the level of damage that might do, well, it might set everything way back. blowback. It seems to me like that's something I'm sure critics will jump on me and maybe correct me on this, which would be fine, but it seems to be a concern. The other aspect of it is politics, and I think I'll get into that, and that is obviously the national team has by far the strongest political connections. I don't think anybody, regardless of your opinion on this, would disagree with that. I mean, Bezos owns the Washington Post, the most influential Democrat publication in D.C., and maybe the second most in the nation. And of course, since the Democrats are now running the government, well, boo for me on that one, but they do. That's going to have a lot of influence on the political decision making, and already the fact that before they're picked for the NASA administrator Nelson, former Senator Nelson, has been confirmed. NASA's went ahead and made this decision. Now, it looks to me like one possibility is that there'll be a challenge to the contract award, which can get into some litigation and all that sort of thing. The other possibility is, which would be a more interesting one, would be that the pressure gets mounted to actually fund a second competitive team, and then there'd be a source selection on that, of course. But that this political initiative might get more money into the program. I mean, it seems to me, of course, Congress is being very stingy with NASA and very loose to spending on all kind of other things, a lot of which are just complete wastes of money, really. I mean, to be blunt, just giving it away, frankly, with no real national benefit. I mean, I guess benefits the people that got the money given away to them, but I'm still sort of looking at the fact that there are a lot of people out there that are gainfully employed, working from home, who have not had any disruption in their paychecks at all throughout the entire COVID crisis, that's received multiple so-called COVID stimulus checks. I mean, while on the other hand, small businesses are going bust all over the place. It just seems to me like this is a crazy thing to do. But so at any rate, I don't see the problem with coming up with more money for another team, particularly if you have a lot of political clout behind it. But that remains neither here nor there. But at any rate, to me, we've embarked on a fairly risky approach to the moon program. I mean, I would rather kind of see SpaceX go off and do what they're doing on their own, and leave Artemis to a more conventional approach. Now, let's be honest here. If on the other hand, it were to turn out that the SpaceX was totally successful in what they're doing and successfully accomplished the moon landings, one would tend to think as the development of the Starship system went forward, they eventually would be able to basically return, which is not part of the current plan, but you could conceivably start returning the astronauts to Earth in the Starship and basically eliminate SLS and Orion completely from the program and have a completely SpaceX-based system. Of course, obviously NASA doesn't have confidence in that at this point, and as they're not going that way. Okay, I mean, obviously that would be cheaper than what they are doing. But of course, that would really create a lot of political blowback because it would put a lot of people out of jobs, and those same vested interests would really go full scale at that point. I think they can live with the current state of things. So, at any rate, I kind of illustrates the state of play here, and of course, I think that the original 2024 date will obviously slip. That was obviously designed against the idea of a Trump second term, which of course isn't happening. So I think that I guess they can slip as far as 2028, right, if necessary. Although I'm skeptical that there will be a Biden second term, but we'll see about that. But at any rate, that's kind of the rundown on what's been done, at least kind of my opinions on it, that the risk of unproven techniques that are being brought into this, when what we really would seem to need is a much more conventional lander. The other problem, I think, is that so much of the current SLS Orion project has been really stifled due to lack of funding, so that we're going to a really, scaled back version of SLS compared to what they really should have developed to make it a fully effective system. And in that case, it would have been much easier to have done a straightforward moon lander and whatever. So we'll see what happens with all this. But I do think that that this is a high risk approach, and it also has some political risk in it as well, as the losers in this come back for their pound of flesh. Well, I'll close this for now until next time.